Some of you, I'm sure, will remember the name Ted Williams. From the late 1930s to the early 1960s, Ted Williams was a star baseball player for the Boston Red Sox. In fact, he wasn't just a star, he was a superstar. Most experts consider that Ted Williams was one of, if not the greatest hitters to ever play the game of baseball. Ted Williams was born and raised in San Diego, California. His dad held different sorts of jobs throughout his childhood. His mom, interestingly enough, worked for the Salvation Army. As you can imagine, Ted Williams, growing up, was a star athlete. And right after high school, where he was a star ball player, he signed a pro contract, moved away, and went on to become a superstar athlete, a celebrity who was rich and famous. A few years ago, I saw a wonderful TV program about Ted Williams. And it showed him, probably in his 70s, as an older man, going back to his hometown of San Diego. He wanted, after years and years away, to go back and to see his old stomping grounds, to visit his old neighborhood, to see the house where he'd grown up as a boy. Well, Williams was there in his old neighborhood with the small TV camera crew, and wouldn't you know it, if while he's wandering around his old streets that he had known so well as a boy, if he didn't run in to a group of his boyhood friends. It was interesting to see. At first he approached them, and there was a bit of shock. Whoa, there's Ted Williams. You remember him? But after the briefest moment of surprise, it was amazing to see these old friends pick up their friendship right where they had left off, despite all the differences that had occurred in their lives in the intervening years. You know, as boys, they'd been regular guys. They'd been friends just like all of us were in a group of friends when we were younger. After they graduated from high school, his friends got jobs in the city and started families and lived in the same neighborhood and sat in the bleachers at the same Little League baseball games. Whereas Ted Williams had moved away to the other side of the country, and he was no longer a regular guy. He was no longer one of the fellas you'd see at work or at the Little League game. He was Ted Williams, baseball superstar. But despite all of that, and despite the fact that these men had not seen each other in maybe 50 years, there they were, hanging around, cracking jokes, reminiscing about old times, just as though they had never been apart. Friendship is a mysterious and a wonderful thing, isn't it? It makes us wonder, what is friendship? What are friends? Someone called Elbert Hubbard once said that a friend is someone who knows you but likes you anyway. There's some truth in that, I think. Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher, said that friends are one soul divided between two bodies. Well, that's a nice thought, I think. I'm not sure that a friend has to be a soulmate necessarily. For what it's worth, I think that a friend is, first of all, someone that you enjoy being around. But even more than that, a friend is, secondly, someone who in some way has left their mark on you. In some small way, you bear the imprint of your friends. They make you just a little bit who you are. My first true friend in that sense was a boy named Chris. We were in the same grade 1 class together. And I think probably from the first day of grade 1, if not the first day, then the first week, Chris and I were best of friends. All throughout our boyhood, we spent an amazing amount of time together. We played at recess. We ate our lunch together. We went to one another's homes after school. We dined at one another's tables, did things with each other's families. Chris was a great, great friend, and I was so fortunate to have a dear, close friend like that. In some small way, my friendship with Chris has made me a little bit who I am. You could not tell the fullness of my story without taking account of that friendship. It's interesting, early on in our friendship, my dad said to me that the two of you will be friends for the rest of your lives. And even if you go long stretches of time without seeing each other, you'll always be able to pick right up where you had left off. Now, as a little boy, I didn't know what that meant at the time, but now I do know what that means. Because when I was 15 years old, my family moved off to a different place. Chris and I graduated from different high schools. We went to different universities. For the most part, we've worked and lived in different areas. For the last 10 years, I've probably seen Chris only a handful of times. But it's not how much we see each other now that matters. It's the fact that whenever we do see each other, we're able to pick our friendship up right where we had left off. I'm sure as I tell that story, you can think of some of your oldest and dearest friends and how much that friendship and that person has meant to you throughout the course of your life. Boxing great Muhammad Ali once said that they don't teach friendship in the classroom, but if you haven't learned what that means, then you haven't learned much of anything at all. Today, as each of us knows, is Remembrance Sunday. And it's not just Remembrance Sunday, it's Remembrance Day. Remembrance Day has fallen on a Sunday this year, and so we observe that important occasion together. Many of us are wearing poppies for that reason. As you will likely know from your studies in school, Remembrance Day commemorates something called the Armistice. It was an agreement signed between the combatants of the First World War on November the 11th, 1918. And each November 11th since that time, we have come together as communities to remember those who went off to battle and who did not return, those who went to the First World War and to the Second World War, and since then to other battlefields as well. On Remembrance Day, we remember the horrors of war, and we remember those who went to witness those horrors on our behalf, whose lives were sacrificed and who did not return. A few minutes ago, Sam read for us the honor roll, the names of those from this very congregation who went off to war and yet who did not return. This same thing was done, I can assure you, in churches and in communities all across Canada and in many different parts of the world. There's a United Church minister who serves presently in Toronto, I believe. His name is Ian McKay Manson. He wrote in an article recently reminiscing about some of his boyhood experiences in his little country United Church congregation in Manitoba in the late 1960s and in the early 1970s. He wrote about Remembrance Sunday and what a solemn occasion it was in his church. And he remembers vividly that when the honor roll was read, that is, the names of those from his church who had gone off to war and not returned, he would look around. He would notice the eerie silence that fell over the room. And he would see as his grown-up neighbors would be visibly shaken, even moved to tears at the mention of the name of a brother or a cousin or an uncle or a friend who went off to war but who didn't come back. Today in 2012, there are fewer and fewer of us who remember personally those who have gone to war, and especially those who did not come back. And yet, even though most of us don't remember these names in a personal way, they are very much like our friends. Like our friends, they have sacrificed for us, even though they didn't know us, even though some of us were not even the glint in our parents' eyes. They did what they felt they had to do and were called upon to do for us, just like a friend would. And like friends, their mark is indelibly on us. For we cannot take account fully of who we are and the world we live in without knowing something of who they were. For as people who are blessed to live in a time and a place of mostly peace and prosperity, it is in large measure because of what they have done for us. And that is something that we must always remember. A few minutes ago, we heard a short story from the Gospel of John. In the minds of many, the purpose of John's Gospel is to show us that Jesus was God. And in part, this is true. We can look only to the first sentence of John's Gospel. And John refers here to Jesus as the Word, and I don't have time to get into why there's that choice of language. But John says of Jesus, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But I would argue that it is at least as true that John wants us to know that Jesus was a human being just like me and just like you in every respect. He was no ghost or apparition. He was flesh and blood just like you and like me. One of the ways that John shows this is by telling us in such vivid detail that Jesus had friends. In chapter 11 of John's Gospel, for example, there was a man named Lazarus who gets some illness and dies from that illness. We know that Jesus on that occasion was moved to tears in his grief and his sorrow because Lazarus was one of his dearest friends. We heard a short story from the Gospel of John, chapter 15. And Jesus said to his disciples in that story, "You are my friends." By extension, Jesus says that to you and to me as well. Now, I don't know if you quite caught that. It might have been a blink and missed it moment. For example, did those of you sitting in the balcony hear it when Jesus said to you, "You are my friend"? Those of you on the lower level, have you ever thought of yourself as a friend of Jesus? Jesus is such a true and a wonderful friend to each one of us. You see, Jesus went on to say that there is no greater love than this, that one would lay down one's life for one's friends. And he said that because that is exactly what he was just about to do. In just a short space of time, he laid down his life for the 12 disciples and for you and for me as well. Now, the Gospel of John also wants to tell us that after he was put to death by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate on the cross, that he rose victorious from death and ascended into heaven. And it is for that very reason that he remains the living Lord of all creation today, that he is available for relationship and for friendship with you and with me. It is for that very reason that we can have such a friendship with Jesus, a friendship of intimacy and of enjoyment. Wherever you might go, Jesus is in a very real sense with you. He is there to be called upon. He is there to remind you that he loves you and that he cares for you. And just like the greatest of our own personal friends, he has left his mark indelibly on us. We cannot fully understand who we are without knowing who he was and what he did for us. You see, it is for that reason that he laid down his life, that he was willing to submit to his fate, which was a death on a cross. You see, friends, when God looks at us, God doesn't hold against us those things that we have done wrong. We don't need to worry about anything or everything that we've ever done wrong, every misspoken word, every mistake that we've made. For you see, when God looks at us, God sees our friend Jesus and his perfect love and his perfect faithfulness, which were the reasons he endured his death, the perfection of his righteousness. All these things are counted to us, and his mark on us cannot be taken away. You see, the friendship of Jesus is one of the greatest gifts of our loving God. Some of you may know the story of Joseph Scriven. Scriven was born in the year 1819 in Ireland. He was one of the lucky few in his day who was able to attend university, and he graduated from university. He fell in love with a woman when he was a young man. They became engaged to be married. But from then on, his life was struck by a series of difficulties and tragedies. On the eve of his wedding, for example, his fiancée drowned. He was understandably devastated by this, and he decided that he needed a fresh start in life, and so he came here to Canada. He lived in Ontario. His main place of residence was Port Hope, in fact. Well, in his sort of second life here in Canada, he met another woman with whom he fell in love, and he became engaged to be married, but she too died during their engagement, and he was never married. And he, throughout his life, battled feelings of great sadness and great loneliness, as you can well imagine. When his mother was laying ill on her deathbed, Scriven wrote for her a poem. It's a poem which isn't history's greatest piece of literature, but nonetheless, it's a poem that all these decades later you may have heard. What a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. Can we find a friend so faithful who will all our sorrows share? Now, as you sit here today, you may not know or feel Jesus as a friend. It may be that you've never heard anyone tell you this before. It may be that once long ago you thought of Jesus as a friend, but have not done so in some time. It may be that you just have difficulty imagining how he could be your friend, or that you are worthy of his friendship. But he is the greatest and the truest kind of friend, for he is the friend that knows all about us and loves us anyway. So if it's been some time since you've thought of Jesus as friend, if you thought of yourself as friend to him, know that because he is such a true and loving and faithful friend, that at any time from this moment on, you can pick right up where you left off. And you will be dearest friends, and it will be as though you had never been apart. And if by chance you have never known Jesus as friend, and you're wondering where to start, you can pick right up where he left off in showing his love and his faithfulness to you by his death on the cross. For each one of us today, Jesus is available as our truest and greatest friend. We can have intimacy and enjoyment with him like any friend, and more so. And what is even more than this, he has left his mark on us. His sign and seal are indelibly imprinted on us because he has made each one of us in the truest sense what we are. That is, beloved members of the family and the household of God. Shall we turn once again to our hymn books now and hymn number 602.